Mardle presents Dirty Briefs, written by Dave Fendem and read by Will Close. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Mardle. To all the hard-working and underappreciated criminal barristers, and my much-loved and long-suffering family. If David Fendem's misspent youth left him with nothing else, it was an incredible nose for dodginess and mastery in the power of persuasion. Fendem is a barrister, having practiced in the law for over 2 decades. He represents both prosecution and defence, with expertise in crime and mental health work. Renowned on the legal circuit for his ferocious, street fighter-style legal battles and smooth talking, he has pulled off results in many highly publicised criminal cases. Introduction. I am a criminal barrister, and, without sounding too big-headed, a not entirely incompetent one. At least, if the measure of competency is the restoration of liberty to those demonstrably guilty of crime, I do all right. Those lucky individuals who have enjoyed my services will tell you that if you find yourself standing next to the shattered window of the local co-op with a jemmy in your hand, or you've been caught shagging the neighbour's cat, but you say you're innocent, I am your man. Throughout my training and career, from the embryonic stages at university, as a trainee, a police station representative, a mental health tribunal advocate, magistrates advocate, and later, a defence and prosecution barrister, I have seen it all. There is little that a person could do in this world that would shock or surprise me by now. I want to share with you some stories of the frankly unbelievable shit that people find themselves in. In doing so, I don't limit myself to the punters I have dealt with myself or my own courtroom cases. I shall entertain you with my own personal trials, the highs, and, more frequently, the lows, as I have attempted to navigate this crazy profession. I shall introduce you to some of my dear colleagues as further examples of the dysfunctional maniacs who make up the criminal bar and in whose hands we entrust the criminal justice system. These are the raw, unedited reminiscences of a bare-knuckle courtroom advocate. Chapter 1. Born to be a lawyer. Rewind 25 years. My skills in demonstrating to juries that the Arabs really do need to buy sand, the Inuit ice, and that an obviously honest witness is not worthy of belief has not come from idle lying about playing Fortnite like the youth of today. On the contrary, the skills of this commendable bullshitter were won on the battlefields of my school and streets of my provincial hometown, where, to be frank, I was pretty badly behaved. When one finds oneself regularly in the doggy-do, as I did, then knowing how to talk oneself quickly and efficiently out of that doggy-do is not just a necessity, but must become a way of life. With the onset of the teen years, and being increasingly led by my penis, things stepped up a gear. For a somewhat spotty, pigeon-chested and unspectacular individual to be able to persuade a real-life female that it was a good idea to let him anywhere near her pants, let alone inside them, took some real silver-tongued proficiency. Talking myself out of trouble and into bed, and vice versa, made me the lawyer I am today. A far cry from the liberal parenting values of today, mandating the provision of a safe roof above the heads of would-be lovers, my folks made it abundantly clear that their house was not to be used as a fucking knocking shop. Late-night bonking was frowned upon by my parents, so much of my teenage life was spent trying to cover my tracks. My mother once claimed that it wasn't the nature of the act that concerned her so much as the image of the poor girl, for whom she had great sympathy, being exposed to a person as objectionable as me. The origins of my enviable powers of persuasion can, in large part, be traced back to the frivolous dodges employed to distract my eagle-eyed and captious mother from the sweet scent of carefree romance. My early childhood was spent hanging out in the office of my dad's scrapyard, A place where to be employed, it seemed, a record of previous convictions as long as your arm was required. Take Bill, a booze-soaked, wiry Irishman, generously exalted to the post of complaints handler. That was a nice promotion for him, having recently holidayed at Her Majesty's pleasure for single-handedly rendering 6 police officers unconscious as they attempted to load him into a police van one evening. One may ponder the question of what attributes my father had identified in him commensurate with that job, but it's safe to say that the business only rarely received complaints. Then take the Jones twins, a personable pair of brothers, always willing to lend a hand. Dad told me that they had retired from a lucrative removals business, neglecting to mention that the removals were seldom with the owner's consent. Despite all of this, there really was honour amongst thieves. It seems, for the most part, that they all worked hard in the cold, wet and arduous conditions of a waste paper yard. My dad saw the good in people and liked to offer a chance, regardless of their background. This was my first introduction to people showing themselves capable of hard work and a positive contribution to society when they could otherwise so easily have been written off. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they were entirely law-abiding, though. A police car at the yard was a very common occurrence. Frequently, one or more of the employees would be led away in cuffs, hanging out the back window of the police car, screaming to anyone who would listen, "Phone RT." RT was a local defence solicitor who would attend the nick and help these poor arrestees out for a price. He was the brief of choice for those in the know. His partner, TR, a notorious solicitor who could often be seen driving his opulent blue Rolls-Royce through the streets, gained quite a reputation for being a talented lawyer. Between them, they commanded most of the business from the local riffraff and were well-respected figures, trading in a murky underworld, which was, at that time, totally alien to me, and would remain so until decades later. Shady scrap-dealing enterprises aside, I was required, like other kids, to go to school. I didn't have an easy time. I was always in some fight or another, and my parents were summoned to the school so many times that they almost gave in and took up residence. If you tell a kid that he is generally a waste of space, and that the best he can hope for is a life of crime, then the consequence will often be one of two things. Either he will completely give up, impregnate the girl working in the nearby burger van, and spend a career behind the till at a petrol station, or he will work hard to prove a point in making something of himself. In my case, I managed to follow a middle course. I wasn't going to stop savouring the offerings of Nat's Baps, but neither was I going to be called a loser. I had a point to make. I worked hard, started to get good results, found my confidence, and made it to the local grammar school. Suddenly, I had lofty ideas of becoming a medic or an engineer. All now seemed within my grasp. You may already be getting the impression that I am cut from a different cloth to many barristers. I wasn't educated at one of the top public schools. Unlike lawyers of that ilk, my problems as a youngster extended beyond bog washes, casual buggery, and similar jolly japes and wheezes. It was being endlessly surrounded by dodgy characters, both friend and foe, that gave me a nose for mischief. I became attuned to sniffing out a ruse, a plan, or a scheme from a good barge pole away. Later in life, as a lawyer, working out what exactly had been going through a client's melon of a head at the time of an alleged incident was the key, not indistinct from Atticus Finch, wearing a person's skin and walking around in it. The place to start in all cases was the place where no jury must be allowed to go, an understanding of what truly happened. The more time I spent with these buffoons, the more adept I became in sussing them out, and the more accomplished I became in preventing the jury from sussing them out. A great many of my barrister adversaries, at least in the early days of my Crown Court practice, were aloof, imperturbably self-possessed, but worse than that, they were totally out of touch with the person they were representing. How can bonking a pig's head in a gentleman's club, or whatever other social activities they enjoyed, possibly provide the tools to appreciate the mind and motivation of the ordinary Joe, or to appeal to the values or principles of 12 ordinary citizens who had come to try the case and required persuading? My theory on criminal advocacy mirrors the rationale for internet security firms hiring computer hackers. That fundamental bit of street savvy and mild iniquity needed to shape a defence case into a victory doesn't come from shooting grouse on Daddy's estate. It is the Tarquins and the Tobins and the Beasley Drake Smythes who stand up to address the jury, speaking Latin, quoting Shakespeare, declaiming Byron, and recoiling in disgust at the repugnant notion of a Turkish kebab, who come to grief when they appear on the opposite side of the bench to me. It is those Tarquins and Tobins who, upon lowering their noses, discover to their dismay that their opponent, a country-dwelling ignoramus, has, with cunning, crept up and pulled their trousers down, exposing their rather unimpressively proportioned genitals. Chapter 2. University Days. People tend to choose university degrees with an eye on their ultimate career. At the very least, they will tend to choose a university course which interests them. I loved my mechanics, and so a degree in engineering would have been great. I had taken all sciences for A-level in the hope that I might even get into medical school. I even managed to get the grades to do just that. People ask why I chose law. Was it to fight for the rights of the innocent, seek redress for the aggrieved, lift the downtrodden, fight the might of the oppressive state? No. It was, in fact, because that UCAS book of degrees was so oppressively large that I couldn't face looking in it. My older brother had read law. That was a degree the last time I heard, and so that would do. I just needed to get my nagging mother off my back and return to what was important, which at that time happened to be coitus with the hottie from my biology class. I didn't like reading. I didn't like lawyers, my brother included, and I didn't like law. Other than that, 4 years reading law sounded great. It may not come as a surprise, but I hated uni, or at least the first couple of years. I realised that a parrot, proficient in repeating the names of endless cases, would do splendidly in legal exams. Having a somewhat rational, mathematical approach to things, I was frustrated by the inherently contradictory and often irrational fabric of the law. Later in practice, I would, as it happened, come to find such inconsistency in approach a friend. It enabled me to start with a preferred destination and then work backwards to find and utilise some law which fitted. Inevitably, there would be something of use in the mishmash of pre-existing, conflicting legalisation. At law school, though, it simply contributed to my general aversion to my studies. I didn't much care for the work, the extensive reading lists, or my housemates in either my first or second years. I would travel home as often as possible, avoiding time at uni. That also meant that I didn't work very hard, barely scraping a pass in my first year. That was, however, until one notorious visit back home to my parents, when I accidentally made love to the neighbour. Had my usual technique, when without a key, to scale the front of my house and climb in through my bedroom window in the early hours, not been halted abruptly by a local bobby, then my philandering would have continued largely unabated. Redolent as I was of the artful dodger, the rozzer was within his rights to suspect I was in the process of burgling the place, and to ignore my piteous pleas against the idea of a street identification involving my parents at 3 a.m. Further revelations that the enterprise had centred around the delicious and lascivious friend of my mother, or that tart, as she would thereafter be known to her, caused more shit to hit the fan than I'd ever thought possible. It wasn't the husband's threats that he would hungrily consume my bollocks that concerned me. On the contrary, that act may have been somewhat edifying. It was the promise of a slow and painful death that I felt I could largely do without. I wasn't proud of myself. All right, at 18, maybe a bit. But my parents, along with most of the neighbourhood, took a dim view of my sexual incontinence and complete lack of moral fibre. For bringing shame on my family, for being chased by neighbours with burning torches and pitchforks, and, in the interest of self-preservation, I gave up on my trips home and studied instead, attaining some decent grades for once. Having made a terrible job of lying my way out of trouble, proposing a scenario of events both consistent with the evidence and my innocence, I also looked deeply inward and vowed never to be caught lying again. I didn't stop lying, just resolved to make a better job of it. By my third year, I was homeless. My previous housemates had thrown me out for being antisocial. As misfortune would have it, 3 others had also been thrown out of their respective houses for various indiscretions: substance abuse, sexual profligacy, antisocial behaviour, or all of the above. We all needed a place to stay, so we pooled our resources. Regrettably, it also meant living together in our final academic year. There was no doubting that we all had our own issues, of varying degrees of severity, although the bad behaviour became greater than that of the sum of the individual participants. Our new digs was next door to an executive massage parlour named A Touch of Class, which it wasn't, for which reason we dropped the "cl" from its name. The location was chosen at the insistence of one of our number who blew his entire student loan there faster than it took Lady Penelope to sodomise him with a chair leg. Even for us non-participants, the year was one long stream of sex, boozing, and quasi-criminality. With the front door destroyed by violence within the first week, icy winds, leaves, and rats were a daily feature, and a Wild West fight between housemates broke all the crockery save a large jam jar, which, through necessity, served as my do-it-all piece of kitchenware for the best part of 10 months. Whilst these maniacs could loosely be classed as friends, they were the sort of friends who would also delight in the gutting of your room by fire, to use one real-life example. Having been banned for 5 months from the student union for an alleged urinal indiscretion, with an additional month to run consecutively for laying down a banana peel on the polished floor of a packed exam room foyer, just to see if it was slippery. It was, by the way. My social life was all but over. While my friends partied at the union, I did more work, visiting the local boozer, the Sherborne Arms, between times to regale Kelly, the barmaid, with tales of treason upon the high seas. Yes, she sported a tight perm, a lot of leopard print, large hoop earrings with "bitch" written in the middle, and a 9-carat gold Belcher chain with a ragdoll pendant. But she was friendly, and, importantly, had a pulse. It was about 2 a.m. one night. In my room, front-facing on the upstairs floor, Kelly and I were having a cuddle. From our respective roles as wheelbarrower and wheelbarrowee, Kelly, with her bronzed face pressed against the window, suddenly exclaimed that there was a punch-up in the street. 2 of my housemates had returned home from the union drunk and aggressive, and were proceeding to needlessly kick the crap out of one of the locals. In fairness, it seemed that the victim was also pissed and giving as good as he got, but that was not going to absolve anyone of responsibility. At around midday on the Tuesday before my final family law exam, there was a loud bang on the door. It was a member of the local constabulary who had come to inquire about the alleged assault that had occurred in the street the previous week. One housemate told the officer that he was there, that he had been set upon and was defending himself. My second housemate said that he had been helping out the first housemate and was acting reasonably. I told the officer that I had witnessed the altercation, albeit qualified by the protestation that I hadn't been involved. I wished I had said nothing. It transpired that the complainant had made a statement claiming that 3 men had attacked him, and, by our admissions, carefully noted in his pocketbook, the officer now had 3 men, which tied in nicely with the complaint. We were all promptly arrested, thrown into the back of a police car, and conveyed to the custody suite of the local NIC. I have never known why custody areas in police stations are called custody suites. The word suite conjures up images of opulence or something with sugar that you put in your mouth for pleasure. I think that they should actually be called custody shitholes. This was my first experience of one. Passing through a cage at the back of the police station, we were frog-marched to the designated custody sergeant, a barrel of a man who sat behind a desk in the foyer area, chicken tikka kebab roll in one hand, pen in the other, and with a smacked-ass face of utter contempt. We were told that we had the right to a lawyer, for someone to be told where we were, and we could make a phone call if we liked. I chose to call my dad. I knew it wasn't going to be a call enthusiastically received. I also knew that the fact that I was entirely innocent would make not one jot of difference. My father knew me, and, in his mind, whatever it was they were saying I had done, I almost certainly had done. His helpful advice to get myself out of the shit on my own, peppered with a few fucks and stupid twats, before he hung up, did little to quell my anxiety. We were relieved of belts, keys, and money. Presumably, the officer took my keys so that I couldn't unlock the cell door and run away, and my belt so that I couldn't hang myself. But it didn't seem as if there would be much opportunity to spend my money, if I'm honest. All 3 of us were then escorted around the corner and put in a cell, awaiting the arrival of the duty solicitor. When an accused person is arrested, he has the right to consult a solicitor. Ordinarily, the police wish to conduct a tape-recorded interview in which they put the allegation to the accused person and invite answers. If a solicitor has been requested, he or she usually sits in on the interview too, having given advice to their client beforehand as to the best thing to do in the interview and ensuring that the questioning is appropriate and fair. Solicitors secretly, sometimes not so secretly, hope that their client gets charged with an offence. In other words, that they are required to attend court and the case proceeds beyond the police station stage. Lawyers need court cases. That is how they earn a living. The old hands of the criminal fraternity usually have a favoured brief or firm that they like to use. Remember RT and the Yard employees. If you had a name for the brief and their firm, the sergeant would phone up the 24-hour contact number of the law firm and somebody would be sent down. Representation is free, paid for by the state. For those, like us, who didn't have our own solicitors, the duty solicitor is there to help. The duty solicitor is nothing to do with the police. Most criminal solicitors are also duty solicitors. To become one, additional qualifications are needed. Duty solicitors are admitted to a rota, and, when their name comes up, work is referred to them by an independent call centre contacted by the police. A similar scheme operates at the Magistrates' Court for those defendants who do not have legal representation. Solicitors are busy people. A duty solicitor may have numerous suspects to deal with at the same time, often at different police stations. They need to travel to the station, gain access, speak to the officer about the evidence, speak to their client about his case, advise the client, and then sit in on a police interview. To the police, the brief is, generally speaking, a colossal pain in the arse. The brief and the police usually rub along okay because, like Brussels sprouts on your Christmas dinner plate, whilst you would love to drop kick them out of the nearest window, you would get an almighty bollocking from someone if you did. Briefs are part of the deal. when all is said and done, everyone has their job to do. Everyone would rather be at home in bed with the missus or hubby, or with someone else's missus or hubby, or, frankly, anywhere other than the shitty custody suite. Both parties have the power to make the life of the other needlessly harder, if so inclined. Sometimes it gets nasty. Usually, it doesn't. The solicitor will inevitably delay proceedings and prevent, as far as they are able to, the police from gathering evidence against their client. The police gather evidence, the brief opposes it. That is clearly not a good springboard for happy bedfellows. Little sleep is lost by the police then, should they drag their heels or delay access of the solicitor to the custody area until they have finished their coffee, pie, poo, or whatever else they deem more edifying. It may be apparent, therefore, that a suspect can be left waiting in a cell for hours. When I later started my career in the law and began to attend police stations to represent detainees, often it would all kick off because of hours spent alone in the confines of that dreadful cell. Whilst improper, it is often remarked by the clientele that the police are occasionally inclined to make a suspect acutely aware of the delay a request for a solicitor can cause, and that if that request is not made, they may be out in a jiffy, perhaps with bail. The police know, of course, that the lawyer's aim of maintaining an accused's innocent status begins in the police station. The outcome of cases can turn entirely on what work the brief does at this early but crucial stage. Police cells are grim places to find oneself, and ours was no exception. A big, heavy steel door marks the entrance to a whitewashed 8 by 6 foot room lit by a single fluorescent bulb. Some have a stainless steel toilet without a toilet seat, and there is a thin blue easy wipe mattress on a wooden bench. Police cells are also, almost without exception, either very cold or boiling hot. Not that that bothers the occasional silverfish creepy crawly that will be seen oscillating across the floor. If you are lucky, you may be thrown a scratchy grey blanket made from some strange recycled material and a copy of the police codes of practice, which, as dull as they may sound, are as exciting as a porno mag to a Cub Scout after the previous 5 hours staring at a blank wall. Expect to be sat in there for a very long time. Initially, the police can detain you for up to 24 hours, but in some circumstances, this can be extended to 72 hours. At the very least, you can expect to be detained until after the recorded interview and until a decision has been made to charge you or not. My experience of the cell seemed to last a lifetime. The hours rolled by, and I became increasingly anxious, primarily because my exam, for which I had done no revision, was the next day. Crying, pleading, and banging on the door evoked precisely zero sympathy. Eventually, the duty solicitor showed up, a man in his late 20s, pale, a bit sweaty, and of a somewhat nervous disposition. He described himself as the young Perry Mason. I was thinking more village idiot. Later court appearances did not dissuade me from the view that the self-proclaimed young Perry Mason was, in fact, a knob. Here in the cop shop, though, I wasn't well placed to quibble, and he did an adequate enough job. He told me to answer the police questions, which I did, regaling the uninterested interrogators with stories of alibis and barmaids with all the bells and whistles. Not that they were remotely persuaded. We were all charged with malicious wounding, given a court date, bailed, and then booted out at 4 a.m. I pretty much flunked my exam 5 hours later, before phoning my parents to break the good news of the legal apocalypse. My impending practical legal experience as a defendant in the Magistrates' Court was scheduled for 2 weeks hence. The idea behind a Magistrates' Court is to dispense summary justice in a cost-efficient way. The court is presided over by a legally qualified, district judge, or up to 3 lay magistrates, who are simply volunteers, but who have the benefit of a qualified legal advisor. A magistrates' court will try crimes of a less serious nature to those heard in a Crown court, and there are some crimes that can only be tried in a magistrates' court. Examples of these so-called summary-only offences include minor criminal damage, common assault, taking a car without consent, and some road traffic offences. Other crimes can be heard in either a magistrates' court or a Crown court. These are known in the trade as either-way offences. Examples include theft, assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and malicious wounding. Finally, there are some crimes that can be heard only in a Crown court. Murder, robbery, and rape are examples. These are known as indictable-only crimes. All cases begin in a magistrates' court, and at the first hearing, the court will inquire of the defendants whether they are guilty or not guilty of the charges. If a defendant pleads guilty, then the court will decide if it is able to pass sentence. Summary matters, subject to limited exceptions, stay in the magistrates' court for sentence. Similarly, the more serious, indictable-only cases always get sent to a Crown court. For an either-way offence, i.e. one that could potentially be heard in either a magistrates' court or a Crown court, the court must decide on the most appropriate venue. Ordinarily, a sentence of 6 months' imprisonment is the ceiling for a magistrates' court. If it is felt that the offence warrants greater punishment than 6 months, the case will be committed to a Crown court for sentencing. If a defendant pleads not guilty, then a similar procedure takes place for the either-way offences. The court must, with reference to a number of factors, which include sentencing powers and the predicted complexity of the case, decide upon the most appropriate court. In other words, whether to keep the case in the magistrates' court or send it to a Crown court for trial. Even if the court considers that it is able to retain the case, the defendant may choose to be tried before a jury in a Crown court. If the defendant has been charged with something serious, he will almost certainly be represented by a solicitor. If he doesn't have much money, then the state, by means of legal aid, will cover the reasonable costs of his representation, although the word reasonable, when it comes to state funding, is itself a matter of conjecture. Whether to persuade a magistrates' court to try a case, or to try to secure a Crown court trial for an either-way offence, is often a tactically important decision for the defence solicitor to make with his client. A magistrates' court has limited sentencing powers and is unaccustomed to handing out heavy sentences. If the defendant is convicted, he may benefit from that. A Crown court judge, by contrast, often with years of experience of handing out lengthy prison sentences, may think that 4 years in the clink is akin to being given a balloon and a ride on the teacups. Moreover, if a defendant is convicted and the Crown court judge thinks that the expense and trouble of a Crown court trial was a total waste, the obvious result is an unpropitious environment in which to plead for a lenient sentence. Weighed against all this is the bare fact that a defendant is many times more likely to get off with a jury than with a lay bench of magistrates or a district judge. There are a number of reasons for this. District judges, for example, are case-hardened. They have heard all of the excuses many times before. It is the boy who cried wolf syndrome. The one time a wolf genuinely has tried to eat the defendant, or to indulge in other bestial acts, the defendant won't be believed by the judge. Furthermore, in a Crown court, a prosecutor would need to convince 12 jurors of a defendant's guilt to secure a conviction, a much more challenging task than convincing a single judge or 3 magistrates. In the event that a magistrates' court does try a case, a defendant may think that he or she is better off with magistrates than with a district judge, as the former are volunteers, non-legal members of the public. That may sometimes be the case. Some magistrates are empathetic. open-minded and mentally agile. Sadly, many are not. Too many that I later encountered in my career appeared to be people who felt that their self-proclaimed liberalism and empathy was best articulated with a robust meting out of justice redolent of the methods of Genghis Khan. Whilst many are switched on, far too many magistrates tend not to be known for their cerebral agility, preferring to eschew the fundamental presumption of innocence prescribed by the law in favour of an attitude of no smoke without fire. The "you wouldn't be here if you hadn't done something wrong" approach, combined with almost unthinking acceptance of police evidence and that of any other witness for the prosecution, guarantees a sticky wicket for the defendant. Your stereotypical magistrate appears to believe that a robust approach is needed to deal with villainy, and that leniency is just a lunch ticket to more crime. They too will become case-hardened if they sit for extended periods of time. To make matters worse, a magistrate will at times be confronted by the palpable derision of the lawyers and legal advisers alike, who might regard them as idiots, and whose lack of respect is only thinly veiled with obsequious politeness. The reactionary display of strength, which, in the absence of any power to hang the arrogant lawyer by the neck until dead, tends to manifest itself in the form of a conviction for the poor defendant. In addition, magistrates make decisions on the law as well as on the facts, unlike a judge and jury, where the jury decides on the facts of a case and the judge rules on the law. Of course, if the magistrates make a legal ruling excluding evidence prejudicial to the defence, for example a previous conviction, then all they need to do is put it out of their minds so as not to prejudice their verdicts. And pigs might fly. You will rarely see a barrister in the magistrates' court other than baby ones, cutting their teeth, finding their feet, and earning their wings. Fuck-ups are better made in a magistrates' court than in a crown court, where the stakes are higher. For those who like to dress up in wigs and gowns, the crown court is the place to be seen. In the magistrates' court, rules of evidence go out of the window. Magistrates get prejudiced by hearing things that should never be said, and the prosecutors are, for the most part, buffoons. If you are genuinely serious about getting an acquittal, avoid the magistrates' court if you can. There are, of course, exceptions, but by adopting "I am fucked if these guys try me" as a mantra ab initio from the beginning, you won't go far wrong. Chapter 3. Trial of the Coburn 3. There was nothing at all funny about us having to attend court, other than the fact that on each appearance the accused were required to announce their home addresses for the court record, and one of our number lived at the Cock Hotel. We all pleaded not guilty at our first appearance in the magistrates' court. It appeared that my two friends wished to aver reasonable self-defence, while my defence was alibi. The venue for the trial was not considered at that time, as I was keen to instruct a new solicitor, and to leave the young Perry Mason to continue his orational mastery on behalf of my two associates. Solicitors and barristers are both lawyers, but there is a division of function between them. Solicitors are busy people, often with filing cabinets full of case files. They represent suspects day and night at police stations, interview witnesses, instruct experts, and advise their clients as to all aspects of their case. Attendance at the magistrates' court is a central part of their daily ritual, where they conduct every type of hearing, including trials. They are much more hands-on with the defendants than barristers. Should matters proceed to the Crown Court, this is where barristers get involved. If cases need prosecuting, then the Crown Prosecution Service will select a barrister from an approved list. For defence cases, the defence solicitor will choose a barrister and send through a brief to his or her chambers. The brief contains the case papers, with a note from the solicitor giving some general information as to the defence case. the solicitor's view on the case, and some of the history of proceedings. Traditionally, the brief and papers were wrapped up in string and tied with a bow, pink for defence work and white for prosecution. But now, everything is digital. Gone are the days of paper, and with it, those of misplacing briefs and making excuses, thankfully. A barrister's toolkit is now simply an iPad. The barrister advises the solicitor with regard to case preparation, but his or her primary job is to do the talking in court. All of the pre-trial hearings, and ultimately the trial itself, are handled by the barrister. In my hunt for a solicitor suitably skilled to help me out of the fine mess in which I had found myself, somebody passed me the details of a man in my university town, reputed to be one of the best in the game. With the address of the offices scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper, I made my way down to a part of town where I had never before ventured. A rough part of the town, I might suggest. The offices were not what I had imagined from sitting in the lecture theatres surrounded by civil lawyers hailing from multi-million-pound glass-fronted modernity. This was a completely different prospect altogether. Found within a depressing, concrete 1970s office block, their name was etched on a small card in a plastic intercom. The reception area on the third floor was the only thing to suggest their existence. Buzzed past a desk protected by reinforced glass, clearly designed to protect against villainy, I was invited into a room for my first meeting. Above the sea of haphazardly strewn papers, and to the side of the wooden pen holder that rose like a mast from its thief-proof bolted base, I spotted my lawyer gazing out of the window from his knackered old office chair. Nicotine-stained wallpaper, adorned with old practicing certificates and a twig where a yucca plant had once grown, provided a fitting backdrop to his decidedly unenthusiastic appearance. I could tell that the 50-something man, with a deeply furrowed face and a calm aura, seated in front of a sagging Venetian blind, had shaken hands with more criminals than I had had hot meals. He introduced himself, revealing himself to be a homegrown Welshman, lit a fag before offering me one, and then picked up some paperwork from near the top of a pile, which I assumed must have been related to my case. What struck me most about this man as we spoke was his incredible mastery of ventriloquism. When he asked for my account of events, although I seemed to be talking, the words that came out of my mouth did not seem to be mine. He was, in effect, a translator of the incoherent and ill-informed, a mystical turd polisher, if you will, effortlessly converting clumsy inarticulacy into something almost plausible. In discussing the events of that fateful evening, I tried to let him know that I had been wearing boxer shorts, but choked on the words. All I could say was, underpants. I tried to explain how, in the later stages of the event, I had split things up, but the word dissipate materialised without my lips even moving. Angry was voiced as distressed. Fucking the barmaid as romantic embrace. Without my realising it, the demonstrably questionable was beginning to sound reasonable, and I didn't even feel a thing. It was around this time that I smugly showed off a bit of knowledge of Crown Court and Magistrates practice learned from my crime lectures, and told him of my resolve to opt for a Crown Court trial, regardless of whether or not the Magistrates accepted jurisdiction. I knew of the higher acquittal rates in the Crown Court, and fancied a bit of that, if he wouldn't mind. Looking at me inquisitively for a moment, he insincerely applauded my hard-earned education. Each day, he said, a local Welshman in this town will collect an upturned road cone from his front garden. The local Heathley, policeman, will repatriate a workman in the road sign 3 miles from the student halls of residence to the road works from where it had come. Mrs. Jones will hose the piss from her petunias, Mr. Evans will swill the vomit from his doorstep, size 9 dents will be beaten out of Mr. Smith's car roof. He lit another fag, taking a large drag, before observing in a comforting, avuncular tone of voice, "You are one of those twats." There then followed a pause, which I felt was questionably too long for him to make the qualification. "As far as a jury might be concerned," he continued. "Trial by jury is your choice, but the pool of jurors is drawn from the local community. It might serve you well to consider that a malevolent, torch-waving, English student-hating lynch mob of 3 is better than one of 12. I wondered to what extent the instantaneous loosening of my bowels was actually detectable. "Fag?" He tossed his packet of B&H across the desk, but I politely declined. After some quiet reflection, I felt I might swerve the whole trial by jury thing after all, and politely invited him to try to keep the case in the Magistrates' Court. The trial date preceded my graduation by a day or two, and I was now